Hi traders, in this lesson I'm going to show you how to draw the RSI indicator over the top of a stochastic indicator by creating our own RSI and stochastic code. So let's get into it. I'm going to start a blank script here. I'm going to remove this script. Going to call this PSMC stochastic and RSI. I'm going to save these scripts, add it to my chart, and we're good to go. So the first thing I want to do here, as always, is get my user input. Get user input. And we need several inputs here in order to draw a fast stochastic. We need the K input. We need the D input. We need an overbought level. And we need an oversold level. So I'm going to use the input function for all of these. And this first input function is going to get our K length. So I'm going to title this input function K length. I'm going to give it a type of input.integer and a default value of 14, which is the standard default for a stochastic indicator. And next up, we need to get our D input, which is going to be a moving average of the K variable. So here I'm going to give it a title of D length, a type of input.integer, and a default value of 3. So these are the default parameters for your standard stochastic indicator. We have a K length of 14 and a moving average, a simple moving average of the K length of a 3-period moving average. And when we calculate the actual stochastic, this will make sense later on in the script. So next up, we need our overbought and oversold levels. So I'm going to title this overbought threshold, and I'm going to give it a type of input.float and a default value of 80. So you could set this to integer if you wanted to, but I find that it's better to set it to a float because then your user can come up into the settings menu and change the overbought level or oversold level more minutely. So you could change this to 80.1, for example. And it just gives you a little bit more control, a little bit more flexibility with your script's parameters. So I'm just going to copy this line of code here and change this to say oversold and change the default value for the oversold to 20. So by default, we're using our overbought and oversold levels as 80 and 20, but you could change these to whatever you wanted to. So 19.9, for example, something like that. But we'll leave it as 80 and 20 for now, and let's move on to calculate our stochastic. So in order to do that, the stochastic indicator is similar to the RSI indicator in that it's an oscillator that oscillates between a value of 0 and 100. Now there's a mathematical formula for this indicator. It's quite simple. You don't need to know this and need to understand what this is or how it works in order to use it. But I like to have a thorough understanding of all the indicators that I use. And so I will write out the formula for this stochastic. And it goes a little something like this. 100 times the close minus the lowest low over the past 14 candles divided by the highest high over the past 14 candles minus the lowest low over the past 14 candles. Or of course, this 14 could be whatever we set our K length to. So let's write this out in Pine code. So we need to create a new variable called K, and we're going to set this to 100 times. We need to open a pair of parentheses here. And we need to get the closing price minus the lowest low over our K input length. So by default, 14. Then close that parentheses. You don't need to have these parentheses here in closing this entire statement. This would work just as well, but I like to, just for visual sake, I like to wrap any equation in parentheses so I just know for sure what arithmetic operators are being executed within these parentheses. But anyway, now we need to divide whatever this result is by the highest high over our K input length minus the lowest low over our K input length. And I'm just going to wrap this entire calculation in a set of parentheses just so that we know for certain that this value here, whatever this turns out to be, is going to be multiplied by 100 here. So there's our stochastic formula. That will give us our fast stochastic. Next up, we need to calculate our D variable, which is simply a simple moving average, SMA, this will use the inbuilt simple moving average function. We need to pass it our K input and our length, which is D input. So now we're calculating a simple moving average of K based on a 3-period length. And our user can change this to whatever they want by changing the D length input parameter in the settings menu. So that's it. We have now calculated our stochastic. I'm going to get rid of this formula here just to tidy the script up a little bit. And all that's left now is to draw data to chart. So for this, I'm going to plot our K variable. I'm going to give it a color of color.purple. I'm going to give it a title of K so that we can adjust this in the settings menu if we want to. Next, I'm going to plot the D variable here, this D value. And it's going to have a color of color.orange and a title of D. Then we need to plot our overbought and oversold levels, so OB level. We'll give it a color of color.red and a title of overbought. And I might set the line width here to 2 as well, just so it's a little bit thicker and stands out a little more on our indicator box. And then finally, I'm just going to copy this entire line of code, paste it down here, change this to oversold level, change the color to green, and change our title to oversold. So now we're drawing our stochastic. And if I save the script and we minimize this Pine editor, there we go. Just like magic, we are drawing our stochastic indicator onto our chart and everything appears to be working perfectly. So just before I move on, I should point out that you can achieve this calculation using an inbuilt function in Pine Script. So I've written this formula out manually because I thought you guys might find it interesting how to achieve this, so that if you ever run across an indicator out there in the wide world of the internet that Pine Script doesn't provide an inbuilt function for, you can just write out the formula yourself. But if we wanted to, we could have just used the inbuilt stochastic function. So this function here takes 4 input variables. It takes a source, a high, a low, and a length. So we could write in here close, high, low, and just we could put 14 in here for a default stochastic length, or just copy our K input into there. And now if I save these scripts, we'll be getting exactly the same thing drawing onto our chart. But for the purposes of this demonstration, we're just going to leave this custom formula in, just because it makes this lesson a little bit more interesting. So now if you were to try to detect setups whenever the RSI goes overbought or oversold, or try to identify divergences, such as this divergence here, you can compare whatever price is doing to your K variable or your D variable. So if you wanted to detect the market being oversold, you could see if the closing price is below K or D. And then if this condition is met, then you can do a bunch of other calculations. But we're not going to go into that in this lesson, because this lesson is just about drawing the stochastic and the RSI, which we'll get to next, onto your chart. And I've already shown you how to detect candlestick patterns and work with conditions. So if you want to make this more complicated, you can go ahead and do that in your own time. But next up, before we finish this lesson, let's draw our RSI on as well. So here I'm going to create a new input variable called RSI length. And I'm going to give it an input title of RSI length, a type of input.integer, and a default value of 14. So by default, we're going to calculate the same RSI length as our K. And on here, I'm just going to add and RSI, and we're going to calculate our RSI using the inbuilt RSI indicator function, which takes 2 input parameters, and that is a source price. So in this case, we're just going to calculate it on the closing price, and we're going to give it a length of RSI length. So by default, this will be a 14-period RSI. And now, if we come down here, we'll plot the RSI onto our chart. I'll give it a color of color.black, and I'll give it a line width of 2 as well, so that it stands out a little more. And we'll give it a title of RSI. So now if I save the scripts, we'll be getting our RSI drawn over the top of our stochastic. So there we have it. And just before I finish this lesson, I'm just going to change the color of this RSI to red or green based on whether it's overbought or oversold, just so we have some visual cues of what's going on with that. So here I'm going to change this to say, is our RSI level greater than our overbought level? Question mark. And if this is true, then set the color to color.red. Otherwise, is the RSI less than our oversold level? Question mark. If so, then set the color to color.green. And if neither of those conditions are true, then we set the color to black. And I should probably change these to less than or equal to and greater than or equal to. So if the RSI hits our overbought or oversold level, the color of the RSI will change color. And if I come to the settings menu, change the RSI length to, let's say, 7. And I'll save those settings. Here we go. You can see that when the RSI goes overbought, we get a red RSI drawing. And when it goes beneath the oversold level, it turns green. And there we have it. We're done. So that's it for this lesson. I hope you found that helpful. If you did, and you want to learn more about Pine Script, head over to pinescriptmastery.com. Here you'll find my advanced Pine Script courses and my basics course, which is free. So if you want to learn more about Pine Script, head over here and you'll find out a little bit more about me and a little bit more about Pine Script. I hope you found this lesson interesting and helpful. I'll see you in the next one.